Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our annual CDD Grand Rounds lecture. My name is Sophia Kozak. I'm a third-year psychiatry resident here at the University of Maryland Sheppard Pratt. First of all, I want to thank all of the wonderful speakers and panelists that have made today memorable so far. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our Grand Rounds speaker, Dr. Robert Fetter, and his talk, Climate Change and the Psychiatrist. Dr. Robert Fetter recently retired from a 40-year career as a general adult psychiatrist in New Hampshire. He majored in psychology at the University of Michigan and went to medical school at the University of Washington and completed his psychiatry residency at Yale. He has publications in the areas of substance use, affective disorders, anxiety disorders, and psychotic disorders. Dr. Fetter is active in a number of climate groups, including the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action, 350 NH, and No Coal, No Gas. He's also the American Psychiatric Association's representative to the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health. Dr. Fetter recently published a brief guide to individual therapy for climate-related mental distress and has given testimony to the Environmental Protection Agency and state legislatures on the mental health effects of environmental pollution. In addition to working for greener energy, Dr. Fetter also enjoys singing, playing the guitar, hiking, skiing, and boogie boarding. Please welcome Dr. Robert Fetter.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And I want to thank the University of Maryland for holding this program today. I think it's wonderful that you're devoting most of a day to climate change, and it's fantastic to see the wonderful turnout that you've had. I'd like to start most of my talks with a joke. It's not easy coming up with a joke about climate change, but I found one that I think is not too bad. 5 people were on a plane that was going to crash: Oprah, the Pope, Donald Trump, Bill McKibben, and Greta Thunberg. There's only 4 parachutes between them. So Bill McKibben takes one and says, "I've got to live so I can continue to work on solving the climate crisis." The Pope then takes one and says, "I have to be there to provide spiritual guidance to the faithful during the climate change crisis," and jumps out of the plane. Then Donald Trump takes one saying, "I have to live. I'm the smartest and most important person in the world," and he jumps out of the plane. Then Oprah turns to Greta and says, "You take the last one. I've lived a good life and yours is just beginning. You may save the world from climate change." And Greta says, "No worries. There's still one for each of us. The smartest man in the world just jumped out of the plane with my backpack." Okay, but getting seriously now, let me see if I can share my screen here. Let me see what happened to what I'm trying to put up. Okay, did that come up? Is everybody seeing that?
Yes, I think just
okay.
If you want to put in like presentation mode.
Okay, there we go. How's that?
That looks good.
Okay, so thank you for that introduction. I think you had mentioned these are the climate groups that I'm currently working with. I was for about 10 years not doing much about climate change other than worrying about it. And a couple of years ago, I decided it was time to stop worrying and start doing something about it. And that sort of coincided with my slowly retiring from my clinical practice. So I now spend most of my time involved in these various climate groups. And I can talk a little more about some of them later on in the talk. Now, there are 2 ways in which climate change affects mental health. The first is direct effects of climate events like floods and wildfires on mental health and the mental health problems that these actual events cause. The other way that climate change is affecting mental health is by people who haven't actually been the victims of a climate event yet, worrying about becoming a victim of a climate event or the effect that climate change is going to have on the world and the anxiety and pessimism that this concern causes. So I want to look at both of these things here. And some of what I'm going to say today is a repeat of what some of the previous excellent speakers before me have said, but that's okay. Repetition is good for reinforcing learning. So the direct effects of climate events on mental health can happen through a number of different types of events. Rising temperatures, storms, flooding, drought, which generally leads to famine, wildfires, and rising sea levels, and the loss of human habitat that all of these things can cause. So let's look at some research that's been done on the mental health effects of these various climate events. First of all, in regard to rising temperatures, there's a fair amount of evidence that rising temperatures are associated with increased suicide rates. And a number of studies have tried to quantify this and found that suicide rates actually increase somewhere between 1 to 2% for each 1 degree centigrade rise in ambient temperature. And it's estimated that if we continue on the current path we're on, that the global temperature is going to increase by 8.5 degrees centigrade by 2100. So you can do the math there involved and just see what effect rising temperatures can have on suicide rates. Another way to look at the effect of temperature is the number of emergency room visits for any mental health condition. And this was a meta-analysis that was done for emergency rooms throughout the United States. And you can see that as ambient temperature rises, especially above 90 degrees Fahrenheit or so, the number of emergency room visits for any mental health condition goes up almost linearly as the temperature rises. There was another study that tried to break this down by different diagnoses. This was done in New York State. And for anxiety disorder, what they found was that as the temperature starts rising above 20 degrees centigrade, the emergency room visits related to anxiety start going way up. For mood disorder, it looks very similar. Once you go above 20 degrees centigrade, you start seeing more and more people in the ER related to mood disorder issues. Schizophrenia takes off a little bit earlier, but again, looks fairly similar, that once the temperature starts rising, the ER visits go way up. Substance abuse seems to take off sooner. People with substance abuse disorders seem to be in some ways even more sensitive to temperature increases. And the group that shows the most significant rise with problems as temperature goes up are actually demented patients. Their increase in visits goes up at a way lower temperature than most other diagnoses. It's also true that crime increases as temperature goes up, and this is a study that was done right in Baltimore. And you can see that the incidence of total crime, which is shown in this upper dark gray curve, again goes up almost linearly with temperature, and violent crime follows a similar pattern. And if violent crime is going up, that means victims of crime, the number of victims of crime are going up as well. And that means that various psychiatric disorders, primarily mood and anxiety disorders and PTSD, are going up as crime is going up with temperature. If we look at storms, the FEMA has data from the first part of this century that shows that if you look at suicide rates immediately following hurricanes, they go up by 26%. Flooding events were investigated in the United Kingdom, and they looked at the incidence of various psychiatric disorders 12 months after a flooding event. And these numbers are much higher than you see, normally in non-victim populations. Anxiety disorder rates typically are around 5%, depression rates typically around 10%, and PTSD typically around 5% in most non-traumatized populations. Another study looked at the impact of wildfires on mental health. This was another big meta-analysis, looked at the 3 countries where wildfires have been the most problematic so far: Australia, Canada, and the United States. And they found that the incidence of a wide variety of mental disorders was way higher than you would normally see if you look 6 to 18 months after people experience a wildfire. 15 to 60% incidence rates are just really way higher than they would normally be for all of these conditions. 2 different organizations, the United Nations Development Program and the Institute for Economics and Peace, which are independent groups, came out with studies a few years apart that had remarkably similar conclusions. And these were that by 2050, if we continue going along the current rate that we are with temperature increases, there's going to be up to 1 billion people per year that will be displaced by climate-related events. And to put this into perspective, right now there's about 100 million displaced people throughout the world from all causes. So by 2050, there's going to be 10 times that number of displaced people due to just climate factors alone by these estimates. And displacement, or being a refugee of any kind, puts people at significant risk for mental health disorders. This study done by the APA on the incidence of mental disorders in refugee populations again showed much higher rates than you see in baseline populations. And also the incidence of completed suicide in refugee populations is about twice as high as that in native-born people. So there are significant effects that are already occurring in victims of climate change, causing severe mental distress and mental disorders. But an even bigger population is the group of people that have not been victims yet, that are just worried about becoming victims, or what effect climate change is going to have on the world and future generations. Now, one study that looked at this, really a seminal study that came out in Lancet in December of 2021. This was an enormous study that took place throughout the world. It interviewed 10,000 people, and they were looking specifically at younger age people from 16 to 25. And it was a study that took place across the world in the 10 countries listed there, which is really a very broad representation of the industrialized world in terms of different cultures. And they asked these people various questions about how climate change was impacting their life. And this is what they found. The basic question was, how worried are you about climate change? And almost 60% of these young people answered the question that they were either extremely worried or very worried. And 45% of them thought that this worry was having a significant impact on their functioning, which could possibly put them at risk for a bona fide diagnosed disorder, according to DSM-5 criteria. And then again, about 2/3 of the respondents felt that climate change was making them feel at least one of these following emotions, which are similar to the emotions that this group was listing during Dr. Greenspun's lecture: sadness, helplessness, feeling anxious, being afraid, being pessimistic, being angry, feeling guilty, ashamed, hurt, feeling depressed, grieving, or feeling powerless. And one of the most disturbing results of this study was that almost 40% of this sample of young people said that they were hesitant to have children because of climate change. And this was a remarkable, similar finding across all these different countries and cultures. The numbers were fairly similar in this regard. And as Dr. Greenspun mentioned before me, climate change is definitely entering the therapy room. We're starting to hear more about this from our patients. This was a headline article that appeared in the New York Times about a year ago. And especially as the COVID crisis is waning, people are starting to talk more and more about this. So my cohorts and I at the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action, I chair a behavioral health work group there, and we were wondering, well, what do we do about this? How do you respond to people that are coming in and expressing distress about climate change? What do we know about how to best help these people? And so we looked at what information is available out there right now. We basically, looked at most of what we could find in terms of what's been published about what people are doing, what people are reporting. There really are no, good controlled studies about this at this point. So most of what we were able to find were, anecdotal reports about what people are doing and what seems to be helping. And we kind of, collated all this together and came up with, a recommendation based on what most people are doing at this point and, reporting success with. So this is what we found. That the first step in this process is to impress on people that they are not sick when they report these findings, that responding to climate change with anxiety, dread, discouragement, despair, grief, or hopelessness is normal because it's a very existential threat to human existence. And it's important to let people know that, just because they're feeling this way doesn't mean they have a mental illness. Now, in some cases, people may have already had a mental illness and this is compounding it, or, concern about climate change has been severe enough to, make them meet the criteria for a mental illness. In that case, the mental illness needs to be treated. But the things that I'm going to discuss in terms of how to respond to any climate change concerns should also be applied to those people. It's important to address cognitive issues regarding climate change to help people decatastrophize this to some extent and help them see that climate change is very complex and that there aren't going to be simple solutions to this. No one person is going to figure out the solution to it, and it's going to require a group effort, but there is reason for hope. The future is still open and influenceable. There are things that are happening that are improving the situation now, and working on the situation as opposed to just sitting and worrying about it is very important. And that even small actions can have a profound effect in complex systems. This is a notion that comes out of chaos theory, that in complex systems like climate change, it's very hard to predict the effect of any input to the system, and even small ones can sometimes have very significant effects. And then it's also very important to teach techniques of resilience, ways of being able to make people stronger in the face of any kind of stress. And, these are things that I think most of us use in treating any of our patients. And these can include things like relaxation training, mindfulness training, strengthening of spiritual beliefs, meditation, assertiveness training, talking about healthy diet. It's very important to eat well, to feel well. Also stressing the importance of exercise on mental health. And then also, encouraging people to experience the natural world as fully as possible. This deals with a notion called biophilia, which is that human beings have a natural need for nature, and that they're drawn to nature, and that being around nature increases our dopamine output and makes us feel good. So, it's important to encourage people to, connect to nature, both in terms of knowing that it's still beautiful, that it still exists in a wonderful way, and, helping them also feel that working on climate change is going to help protect that. So, this can be encouraging anything, hiking, kayaking, snowshoeing, beachcombing, more beachcombing, or, just getting outside and finding a nice calm place and experiencing it. And, as evidence of how biophilic we are, I think that many of you may feel that just looking at these beautiful color pictures kind of helped you feel better than you were just a minute or two ago after looking at lots of black and white verbiage up on the screen. The other thing that's very important in terms of helping these folks is encouraging strong social supports, that this is a very essential part of treating climate distress, encouraging the shoring up of family and friends, encouraging involvement in faith groups, being involved with neighbors. And there are a number of climate-oriented support groups. And, for people who don't have sufficient social supports, or who just want to build more social supports around climate issues, these are all groups that are basically support groups and educational groups to learn more about climate change. None of these are involved in any real, climate or political action. They're really primarily support groups, and these can all be Googled, and you can connect to them online. And they also, many of them have in-person groups that meet in various locations. But the most important thing in helping folks with climate distress, everyone that's been doing this agrees, is getting them involved in purposeful action around climate change. And this can take the form of either individual action or group action. Individual action is doing things to reduce your fossil fuel use, like making your home more energy efficient, reducing car and plane travel, using electric vehicles, reducing consumption of meat and dairy products, which have a major effect on carbon emissions. But even more important than individual action is group action, which means joining a group that is actively involved in doing something about climate change. And I've listed up here, the groups that I often direct people to. These are groups that I think are both effective and represent quite a wide range of different approaches. 350.org is the group that Bill McKibben started many years ago as one of the first climate aware groups. And they have state chapters in just about every state that people can get involved with. And they do a number of different types of action. They are really quite broad in their approach. They do demonstrations, lobbying political groups, getting involved in legal issues. So they're a good wide-ranging org. They tend to be fairly young people that are involved in 350. The Citizens Climate Lobby is a group that is specifically oriented around trying to get a carbon tax passed. Most economists think that this is going to be the most effective way of dealing with increased carbon emissions. And this group is primarily focused around that, lobbying both state and federal lawmakers around trying to get this type of legislation passed. The Environmental Voting Project focuses on getting people out to vote for environmentally conscious candidates. Extinction Rebellion is the most radical of these groups. These are the folks that are crazy gluing themselves to art masterpieces in art museums across the world. They're really out there trying to draw attention to climate change in any way they can, in any politically radical way they can. So if you've got somebody that's very left-wing and wants to do that kind of thing, that's the group to point them to. The National Resources Defense Council primarily gets involved in legal cases around emissions and climate change issues. They're involved in a number of really interesting cases throughout the country right now. No Coal, No Gas is probably the second most radical of these groups. They're mostly involved in the northeastern part of the country, New England, and they're focused around trying to shut down fossil fuel-based power generating plants. The Sierra Club, you've probably all heard of. This is also one of the oldest groups here. They're involved in a wide variety of very pro-environment and carbon emission reducing activities. They, very large organization. If you have somebody that wants to get involved in a big organization, this is the one. And then Third Act is a relatively recent group that was started by Bill McKibben. He's kind of gotten out of 350 org and is now focusing his efforts on Third Act, which is primarily oriented towards retired folks, older people. So if you have senior citizens that want to get involved, this is a really good group to point them towards. Now, in terms of things that we psychiatrists can be doing specifically, the American Psychiatric Association has a caucus on mental health and climate change that any APA members can get involved in. This is a group that discusses climate change issues and tries to get things to happen within the APA around them. You can find this, hopefully, this group through psychiatry.org, the APA's website. However, it seems to me every time the APA updates their website, it gets harder and harder to find things. So if you do have trouble locating it through the website, you can contact Ferdinand Daswagwo directly. He's the caucus leader right now, and that is his web or his email address, and he'd be very happy to get you directly involved that way. Another group is the Climate Psychiatry Alliance. This group was actually formed mostly by APA members who were kind of frustrated with the slow rate at which the APA was getting involved in climate issues. And that's a function of the fact that the APA is often very careful about what it does politically. And it's just a very big organization that moves very slowly. So the Climate Psychiatry Alliance was formed, to try and be more direct and faster moving on climate issues. And as I say, a lot of the people that are involved in the Climate Psychiatry Alliance are APA members and also part of the caucus. We are very much a sister organization with the Climate Psychology Alliance, which Dr. Greenspun mentioned. We love them and cooperate with them on a lot of projects, and they're really part of us. Finally, another group, psychiatrists can get involved in is the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health. This is a group of medical specialty societies and state medical associations that have joined together to work on climate change. It's a very large group and represents a lot of docs, and their website is below. They are a tremendous resource for any kind of materials you want related to climate change and health. They have a huge collection of materials that can be used in this regard. Their primary activities right now are lobbying both federal and state levels for climate action, and also trying to get docs involved in reducing greenhouse gas emissions from hospitals and the medical community. We are responsible for about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions, and they're really out front in trying to help hospitals and docs reduce their carbon footprints. Now, unfortunately, getting back to the patients that we interact with, we are not going to be able to deal with all of the people out there who need our help and who are going to be experiencing distress through climate change. This is a kind of a schematic graphic of the United States that came out of SAMHSA, which demonstrates the accessibility of mental health care in various states in the country. And the scale down here at the bottom, starts out at very light, which is mostly New England, and gets gradually darker and darker pretty much as you go west. And this represents the percentage of people in each state that have little or no access to any type of mental health care. And the light colors, like you see here in the Northeast, indicate that less than 10% of the population has difficulty accessing mental health care. But as the colors get darker and darker, when you get to Kansas, Arkansas, and Tennessee, you're into states where at least 50% of the population has no direct access to mental health care right now. And it gets even worse as you get to, states like Idaho, Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming, where 80% or more of the population has very poor access to mental health care. And the United States has the best access to mental health care of any country in the world right now. So it's even worse in other parts of the world. So, we are never going to be able to, provide the help that's needed to all the people that need it, because there's going to be too many people that need it and not enough of us. So in order to try and address that problem, there are a number of organizations and people that are trying to address this issue from a public health or community-based approach. And the biggest one of these is the transformational resilience movement. And this is a community-based method of helping people build their capacity to withstand trauma and move forward from learning by it after it occurs. So it's really very much a preventative type of approach to this problem. And it involves educating people in 3 types of skills that are called trauma-informed skills, presencing skills, and purposing skills. So let's look at what each of those are. And they really parallel the things that I was talking about that we came up with in terms of how you help people on an individual basis. So trauma-informed skills are basically educating people about basic information on how trauma and stress affects the mind and body, and also basic information on how trauma and stress affect the behavior of groups and responses of people in groups, and helping people be aware of what symptoms of trauma can be in themselves and others, especially mental health symptoms. The next thing are presencing skills, and these are things to help people with their own emotional self-regulation. These are things like mindfulness training, relaxation training, educating people about good diets and exercise, that sort of thing. And also encouraging people to build strong social supports with their social networks. And also, helping improve cognitive awareness of the climate change situation, helping them see the climate change situation in a more appropriate and helpful light. Finally, there are the purposing skills, which focus around active engagement in groups, like we were talking about, helping people reframe traumatic experiences in a way that can help them move forward, helping people make individual and group decisions based on appropriate values, and also harvesting hope. So that's the approach that's taken. And there is a multinational group involved in this effort called the International Transformational Resilience Coalition. This is headed by Bob Doppelt, who Dr. Greenspun also referenced. He's a pretty amazing guy. He has a degree in social sciences, and he's been working on this for years, and has really been a forward-moving person in this area. And this is their website if you're interested in learning more about this. The major effort they're involved in right now is getting a law passed at the federal level, the Community Mental Wellness and Resilience Act. And this is going to establish funding through the CDC for community-based programs designed to address mental health issues of the climate crisis. And the hope is that this act will create funding in the billions of dollars to get this program moving forward, which is felt to be what's needed. This was introduced in the House and the Senate already, and the hope is that our Congress can come together in a bipartisan way on this and get this thing passed. It's not going to be easy given the way our Congress is currently functioning, but we're hoping that in this area, Democrats and Republicans can come together and get this passed this session. Transformational resilience is also happening on a global scale, and this is through a group called COP2, which stands for Care of the People and the Planet. And this is an international group of mental health and climate experts, and they're hoping that by 2030 to increase resiliency in 4 billion people on Earth whose lives by then are going to be severely affected by climate change. It's a big task, and it's going to be difficult, but it'll be interesting to see how they proceed with this. The history of this is very interesting. This group was actually given this charge at COP27. Now you have to get your COPs straight here. This COP is the United Nations Conference of the Parties, which is the United Nations climate effort, which has been in existence for many years now. This was the group behind the Paris Accords. COP27 was the meeting which just occurred in November of this year in Egypt, which was the most recent UN climate meeting. And this group basically was present at that meeting and spoke up and said, look, you guys are talking a lot about what the Earth needs to do about climate change and reducing greenhouse gases, but you haven't said much about mental health. And we need to do a lot about the mental health effects of climate change and getting people, prepared for this. And they actually got a very positive response from the COP27 leaders, and they said, you're right, we're going to charge you guys for doing this, come up with a plan. which was a very surprising and positive response. So that's what they're working on now. And if you want to get involved with that effort, this is the website for these folks. So that's most of what I had to say today. I wanted to leave room for some questions. This is my email address if you want to contact me, about any questions that you have, or if you'd like copies of my slides from today, I can get them out to you.
There was one question in the chat from kind of the first part of your lecture asking if there's conservative organizations who are concerned about the climate crisis.
There are, I don't have a list of them that I can give you right now, but some of the more conservative religious groups are concerned about climate issues and are taking this up. There are some other older, Republican groups that are also involved in climate change efforts. So they are out there. I'm sorry I don't have names or email addresses to give to you, but there are definitely some conservative groups that are concerned and working on this. I mean, it's interesting because the Republican Party back in the 1980s were the most outspoken advocates for conservation. And they were the ones that were starting to talk about climate change. And, the nature of the Republican Party gradually changed over the next 40 years. And, it's a very different Republican Party than we have today, But they were really the ones that started this. And, there are still many members of the party that are involved in this. Whoops, I don't know what.
Thank you. And then we have some more questions coming in. So another one is, what are some effective ways to biophilic principles into our clinical practice setting? I don't know if that was, introduce. What are some effective ways to introduce principles into our clinical practice settings? Thank you, Dr. Greenblatt.
Okay. Well, there are a number of things that can be done. Some people, hold their sessions outside. They go outside with their, patients and meet with them out there. There are a number of hospitals now who are trying to incorporate this into their design by making sure that, patients have windows in their rooms that look out onto green spaces, or that there are, green spaces in the hospital that people can go to. So that's another approach that has been taken in this regard.
Awesome. And then the next question is for counselors, psychologists, and social workers, if they're seeking, oh, just kidding, that's a comment, not a question. My bad. That's an announcement about fees. All right, well then, that's all the ones from the chat so far. Does anyone else have any questions they want to ask at this time?
I do have a question, Dr. Fetter. Thank you so much for speaking to us today. We really appreciate it. I know that you've kind of told us several ways that we, on an individual basis, can get involved, whether it's with personal lifestyle changes, with groups that we choose to join or engage with. I was wondering if in your practice or in your line of work, if you've come across ways that either your offices or if you worked for a department, how they were able to make sustainable or climate conscious adjustments to their own way of practicing.
Well, I'm sad to say that in terms of my own direct experience, there's not much I can tell you. New Hampshire, in a lot of ways, has been behind the times in this regard. And we're, our group, the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action, is, working on this right now, trying to get, hospitals in New Hampshire on board with this and getting people more aware of it. Part of the problem has been just getting the healthcare community aware of this issue. It's only been within the last year or so that significant numbers of, people within the health community have, started working in this area and becoming active in this area. So it's really, a very new thing for a lot of people, and hopefully those kinds of efforts are going to continue to grow over time.
Thank you. You have another question. In terms of your experience in several climate action groups, what is a climate resource or piece of knowledge that is underestimated or understated, but you feel is very meaningful to you as a person and to you doing your job as an advocate and a psychiatrist?
Well, one really excellent resource on climate change and mental health is the report by the American Psychological Association on climate and health, which you can access by just Googling that, or you can find it on our website, the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers. You can find it on the Medical Society Consortium website. It's probably the single best written resource out there right now on the entire field, and I would encourage people to look at that. Another resource that was very formative for me, and which I often encourage people to read, is The Ministry for the Future, a book by Kim Stanley Robinson. This is a work of fiction about the effects of climate change in the future and the attempts of United Nations organization to deal with it. It's a really excellent and frightening book about the way things could develop if we don't start getting on track with doing things about it. It's also a very exciting story. So I would encourage people to read that book, The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'm just seeing if there are any more questions before we wrap up. Oh, there is one. Of those areas in the US where marginalized communities are found everywhere, what are some of the strategies for helping these communities to have access to mental health services?
Wow, I would direct you to SAMHSA with that question, which is an agency in Washington. That's really their charge, is to try and help analyze and improve mental health services throughout the United States. I think things that they're trying to do are encouraging psychiatrists and other mental health providers to move into underserved communities. It's not very easy because most of us seem to like to live and practice in cities, and we're needed out in more rural areas. There are, some programs out there to encourage this, although they've become less active and less funded in recent years compared to the way they were years in past. One of these is the Indian Health Services. There have been others, that public health service programs that have funded people through their residencies for public health service years as payback. As I say, all these programs have kind of been less active than they used to be, but this was one way to try and address it. And the other is to just, try and get people into more underserved communities, which is not easy because we seem to want to stay in the cities. But I think increased awareness of this will hopefully get more people out there. Telemedicine has also been helpful in this regard. It has certainly increased access for a lot of people, and hopefully, telemedicine will continue to be supported by insurance companies so that providers and patients can continue to use it.
All right, well, if there are no other questions, then should probably wrap up. Thank you so much, Dr. Feder, for coming.
You're welcome.
So, thank you, Dr. Feder.
I'm gonna just go ahead and give some closing remarks real fast. If anyone needs to go, feel free to hop off, but I just wanted to first off thank everyone again for coming. I want to say thank you to our speakers, our panelists. We all realize that you have very busy schedules, so the fact that you're willing to take time out of those schedules to participate today means a lot. It's much appreciated, and we very much all admire your efforts and commitment to this topic. I also want to say thank you to Anna and Janet for their hard work and commitment to making this event happen. I witnessed firsthand all the time and effort that they spent today, or not just today, but in the months leading up to today, to make the program successful, and it has truly been remarkable. Also want to thank everyone just who attended today, both for grand rounds and the presentations earlier this morning. I think I speak for all of us in the residency that we hope that the conversations today were inspiring, thought-provoking, and hopefully everyone walks away with some sort of newfound vigor for addressing how climate change can affect, well, all aspects of health, but especially mental health and our local community. Lastly, just more of a logistical thing. If we receive permission from the presenters, we'll distribute any of the presentations that we receive. I'm also downloading copies of the chat. I'm going to go through and edit them to make it a little bit more readable and flows, but that way there's been a lot of resources and links to resources, journal articles that were included in the chat. So if anyone wants access to those again, we'll email those out along with any presentations that we get. And so that's all I have to say. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Aaron Wright so he can present the Rose Memorial Awards.
Okay, thank you very much. So for people who don't know, annually at the CDD, we give out the Rose Memorial Award. And it's named after Whitney Holland Rose, who was a second-year resident in our program when she was tragically killed in 2003. Dr. Rose was very active in her community. She had a spirited love for cultural diversity and showed a sense of compassion for all with whom she came in contact. It is in her honor that the Rose Memorial Award is given to psychiatry residents and to faculty who demonstrate tolerance and empathy towards their patients and others, and are dedicated to serving their community and interested in the promotion of cultural humility in psychiatry. And before I give out the award to for the residents, I think Anna is going to give out the award for the faculty who received that this year. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. So this year's Rose Award the Faculty Rose Award was selected by a resident survey. Although from what I understand, she's on vacation. This year's Rose Award is being given to Dr. Marissa Flaherty. Dr. Flaherty has been a consistent part of the department's diversity efforts, and she's been a mentor and source of support for many of our residents. So congratulations, Dr. Flaherty.
Yes, great. And for this year, can you guys hear me okay? Yes. Okay. This year we actually have 2 recipients of the Rose Award for the residents. The first awardee is one of our current chairs of the CDD committee and who helped plan this day. She's been very active with the Medical Center's Minority House Staff Organization, very devoted to seeing everyone as an individual and caring for everyone she comes into contact with. And that award goes to Janet Karanja. And so for people to know, you get both a certificate and a small check to go along with it as well. And our next awardee is another one of the current chairs of the CDD committee. She's also organized the residency program's anti-racism in the arts group. She served as this year's Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Chief Resident, and she co-chairs the Education Subcommittee of the Diversity Committee. And that award goes to Anna Ziera. So congratulations, Anna and Jen. Well deserved for both of you. All right, I think that ends today's CDD and Grand Rounds. Again, I want a big thank you to the whole committee, also to all of our speakers who presented on this extremely important topic. So thank you all for coming.